We are seated here at the Gardens of Africa Global Radio in our base, Accra, Ghana, where we bring you the Africa Daily Show. Not here, by the way, in the studios, but this is actually a special edition with Professor Yidana and, of course, our guest contributor, Dr. Mankutam, on the book that Prof would be launching soon, Surviving Africa in the 21st Century, Echoes and Lessons from the 20th Century. Like I said, it's the title of the book alone sends a certain kind of message, because there's a bit of a conversation surrounding the 21st century as against the 20th century. I mean, some of us were born in the 21st century, I believe, and so if you look back, you'd want to think deeper on why Prof is actually, going back to relate to the 20th century. So this is going to be another session of 15 minutes, and the topic that we will be, digesting here has to do with wealth and misuse of resources. For me, I really love this particular, topic, because we have been going over and over again, especially an example is here in our base, Ghana, when the issue of building a cathedral came up, and of course building certain award house, which I think personally is not necessary when we still have people on the trees, peoples on the trees. Certain roads are not plowable. I mean, places that you cannot actually have access to quality healthcare. And for me, if you ask me, I think this is where I would say we are not actually, channeling our resources to the right place. Let me start with Professor. This is more of like the general conversation out there. But what aspects of wealth and misuse of resources are you covering? A new info that you're looking to reveal to the world, Prof?
Not necessarily. They say that all history goes back to the same dustbin.
Okay.
And you take the same trash and you clean it in different ways and give it different stuff. So
exactly,
nothing is new. But of course, take the example of DRC, Nigeria, even South Africa.
Right.
And of course our own Ghana.
Ghana, right.
Nigeria is billed as the wealthiest country in Africa. But nothing about that country reflects that, except in the material opulence of the elite, the wealthy.
Right.
Right?
The possessions.
Exactly. So you take the case of MEND, the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta.
Niger Delta,
right?
yeah.
The fundamental reason for that movement is poverty. But that region produces much of the oil of Nigeria.
In Nigeria, exactly.
So what that tells you is that there's some sort of failure to channel the resources of that country reasonably and equitably. Of course, we're not talking of a perfect outcome.
Right.
But there's no reason why Nigeria cannot have less than 5% poverty. There's no God-written reason on this planet.
It has the potential to do that.
It has the wealth to do that.
Right.
There's no reason why Ghana cannot have 3 to 2% of poverty. It has the potential to do that. However, you have new looters and bilkers within ourselves. So the greatest thieves in Ghana are not the armed robbers on the streets.
Right.
It is the man with the suit and the tie,
Right.
who at the stroke of a pen can take away medical resources, educational resources,
health resources,
all those resources, and then transform that which is a public good for their own individuated selfish good. Right?
Right.
So DRC, of course, has gone through one might call a crisis, but is wealthy. Angola is wealthy, and we'll get to China and India at some point, and I'll explain that. One of your producers was curious as to why I was talking of India. Yeah, okay.
Right.
So what I'm saying is, you don't have to be an intellectual, that the visual cues are there
for you to see.
Yes, you don't have to go to school to understand suffering. You don't have to be a PhD to understand hunger. You don't have to be, to understand the structural inefficiency of Ghana.
They are everyday things.
Exactly. Yesterday I was going home, and on a 2-lane street,
right.
A lot of truck drivers and people were using the outside arm, and the police came and stopped them. And I was telling the guy who drove me, I said, that's a nonsensical action, because these people are reacting to the structural crisis of the country, which in itself is created by misgovernment and misuse of resources.
Right.
And yet the government has sent its arm of violence to come and deal with them in a situation in which they are reacting precisely to the crisis that the government has created.
So what the government should have been doing is looking for a solution
to
prevent that from happening.
How to create a 4-lane area there.
Exactly.
And then create a road from the Tema runabout to Kong. And then let those going to Duenya and Aflao go.
Right. I think Prof is speaking our language every now and then. We close from work at 5 p.m. We get to the junction. And all we always talk about, I think every now and then, our topic, myself and the producer, is about how we are still managing a narrowed lane. We say 2-lane and we think, oh, we've actually constructed something. But you go into other countries, 4 lanes, possibly going, because if you take the lane from here going to Ebri, that's the same road you get to Ebri, I'm right here, to Koforidua. So obviously you should be expecting traffic, but the lack of thinking, that is what we're looking at. And it seems they're not willing to think enough. And by that, it means that the resources are channeled, as Prof said, towards a different direction by the use of a pen. Let me cross over to Dr. Mankutam on the misuse, wealth misuse of resources. This seems to be something, like Prof said, it's practical. We seem not to be doing things that we're supposed to be doing. We still see schools under trees. We still see hospitals understaffed, lack of equipment. And by that, a lot of people are losing their lives. Roads recently at the Upper West region, it was a minor flood, I must say, because it wasn't the spillage of the Bagre Dam that we would, attribute to how devastating it can be in terms of destruction. But this was just a rainfall, and then it cleared up the bridge. Doctor, what is your take on this?
Well, I've been having these conversations with Professor Yidana for now over a decade, and they continue to stimulate me. My thoughts on these issues is that I think we have to think about the issues of, are we really serious about African liberation? And we invoke institutions like education, but we've seldom asked, well, what kind of education? Is it consciousness raising or behavior raising? And this is a point that one of my dear colleagues, Dr. Obadile Kambon, raises on a consistent basis. And it ties into another critical thinker who is an ancestor now by the name of Harold Cruz, sociologist who at the end of his life talked about the politics of survival.
Right.
I think it's critical for us to begin to really assess the significance of the distinction between information and behavior. The other thing that I'm always interested in learning more about is this thorny issue of invoking Western phenomena as the standard. Okay. The reasons that, if we think about Africa's relationship to the world, the reasons that the roads are so nice in America is because war was declared upon Africa over the previous centuries. Right. Whether it's through enslavement, through Arab invaders, or enslavement and colonization by European invaders. Right. We seldom ask that question, even in the 21st century context, in terms of our consumption patterns. You are funding your enemies, as Professor, Dr. Kambon often also suggests. So I think that's a critical issue to also think about. To me, it's disturbing when I hear the consistent references to how much better things are in the outside world in comparison to our own context, without an understanding of how they are intertwined. They are entangled. Right. One could not exist without the other. Exactly. London is so-called beautiful because of its predatory relationship to what people sometimes, and others, even today, call the global South. Yeah.
Let me make three quick points. Hafiz, right? Mentioned earlier that Africa is a young continent. Yeah. Which I understand what he means, but it's a faulty assumption. Africa is the oldest continent on the planet.
In terms of
the origins of the human existence.
Okay.
This is, so if everybody in the world dies, and you're left with 10,000 Africans,
right,
the entire DNA sequence of the human race will be intact.
Amazing.
The entire DNA sequence of the entire human race will be intact in those 10,000 people. In other words, when you're talking of Homo erectus or Homo sapien or the Girmaldi man, these are the sort of initial ancestors, right? So we populated the world. Africa populated the entire world.
So Africa is considered the mother of the world.
Exactly, exactly. Some went through the Straits of Gibraltar, some went through the Isthmus, some remained here, right? So that's one. The other thing is that, take the example of Ayikoyama.
Okay.
They wrote a book called The Beautiful Ones That Are Not Yet Born. The man in the book is the most honest man in Ghana. But he gets disrespect from his wife because he would not take bribe. And the ones who are taking bribe get wealthy. And the wife eventually calls her husband Chichido. Chichido is this Ashanti bird that hates feces but eats maggots.
Right. Interesting comparison right there. So it has become a norm.
Yeah.
I think that exactly we have normalized it, that so far as you are exposed to the wealth that is meant for the country to govern and move towards the right direction, it is your own.
Yes.
It's kind of like a normal thing.
That's why people take loans from bank to run for parliament.
Very interesting one. But it happens.
Yeah.
I mean, interesting submissions by Doctor and Professor in that regard.
And he started his submission in this second department of the conversation with reference to certain countries, Nigeria and the like.
Exactly.
And speaking of Nigeria, in terms of resource, I mean, they are endowed.
Right.
But if you look at the country, the continent, I mean, the resources are abound.
Yes.
Now, in my little readings, I come across this term in scholarly circles a lot used, the resource curse. Some call it the Dutch disease and everything.
Yeah.
Now, do you think the situation of Africa actually gives meaning to this phenomenon? And if so, what hope is there of ever lifting it?
I have never bought into that, nonsensical assessment.
Okay.
You know, it's a fatal paradox to say you have resources, and I think what they're trying to say is that the resources have essentially created an environment that is counterintuitive to what resources should do, right? So take, for example, in the 70s, Ghana's GDP and GNP was higher than Malaysia, Indonesia, Norway. I could keep going. But the difference between Ghana and those countries that I've mentioned is precisely what Professor Flemming, Professor Mankutam mentioned earlier on. So my view is that those ideas, which are, if you trace them, they come from policy institutions in whose best interests for Africa to remain subordinated to Western interests with its resources. It's very neoliberal in nature. It comes from the 1960s, the modernization theorists who made this essentially destructive argument that came out of a cultural hubris. Resource cannot be a curse.
There's actually a paradox, like you mentioned, a paradox of plenty.
Yes.
I mean, sitting on so much resource, and when you look at the levels of development,
there's
a discrepancy.
But the problem we have is what Ngugi calls, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the one who wrote, he calls it parasites in paradise.
Right.
There's a parasitic relationship between the elite here and the elite in the West. And they both perform a love dance, which I talk about in my book. It's a seductive love dance. The ones from the West, they huff and puff about how ungovernable Africa is, how Africa is mismanaged, partly true, partly false.
Okay.
And the elite here, they huff and puff about colonialism and the strictures and what the Westerners are doing.
Yeah.
But in each other's mind, that's a dance to legitimize each other's behavior. So resources, as being a curse, they've never bought my intellectual curiosity at all. is a contradiction in terms by every stretch of the imagination. What we should be thinking about is the emancipatory project, the political emancipatory project, the economic emancipatory project. And what I mean by that is not to delink from the world. No, but to create circumstances in which our negotiating power
would be much stronger.
Exactly. That's why Nkrumah was talking about the United States of Africa. That's what he meant when he said the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked with the total liberation of Africa. Because a very wealthy Ghana in a chronically unwealthy Africa would invariably become unwealthy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Powerful ending right there by Professor Yidana, and of course interesting and insightful submission by Dr. Mankutam. And this is another interesting, insightful topic that you would find in the literature authored by Professor Yidana, Surviving in the 21st Century, Echoes and Lessons from the 20th Century. You should look out for that particular literature. And believe me, you would tend to reevaluate yourself, like Madam Yasmin would say, decolonize yourself, and but I mean, I listen to, I read a few articles, you listen to a few scholars, and all you hear is sometimes, as you started mentioning, like Nigeria, I mean, it was seen as a business venture, you get there and all you see is business, and not to go and actually sit down and have a conversation at the table, but you're looking at, the superior here, and we happen to be the subordinates. And I like the fact that we should be in a position to actually have that negotiating power. If it's no for us, it should be no. Not when they bring something at the table and, we find ourselves 50-50, and at the end of the day, go home with nothing. So this also is a wrap on our second topic for today, on our interesting conversation in the Gardens of Africa Radio. This video also would be made available on our YouTube page. Do well to subscribe, like, and share. And that's wealth and misuse of resources. And there's a whole lot more on this particular topic that you would find on the book, the literature by Professor Yidana, Surviving Africa in the 21st Centuries, Echoes and Lessons from the 20th Centuries. I am Barry Musa. Stay tuned for our next episode where we get to another interesting conversation, and that is yet to come. Thank you.